Hi, how are you, Amy?
Hi there.
It's lovely to finally meet you. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this with me.
Absolutely. I am so honored that you got in touch with me.
Well, my name is Jean Rosecrans. I'm an integrative health student in my final semester. I'm working on a capstone project, which is the equivalent of a thesis project. I am also a licensed massage therapist, and I'm very interested in bereavement massage. So much, in fact, that I have included it as one of my focuses of my capstone project. I'm incredibly grateful to have with me today um, Aimee Taylor, founder of the Institute for Grief Massage. And Aimee, I cannot thank you enough for graciously agreeing to speak with me today. Thank you.
Absolutely an honor.
So if you could just kind of briefly share your background, education, why it is that you found yourself in this business, that would be wonderful.
Absolutely. Um, Grief was really not on my radar at all until 2005. In December, just before Christmas, my brother died suddenly in a very traumatic car accident.
Wow, I'm so sorry.
Thank you. So he was 20 and I was 24. And at the time, I had no awareness of how much that would change me. And you can't go through an experience like that at that age without it shaping your worldview.
Mm-hmm.
So I was already scheduled to attend massage school. I hadn't chosen the school yet, but that had been my plan in the new year. So there was a part of me that did not want to do anything, that
Right.
massage school felt very trite and unimportant considering what I was going through. Um, but I felt a real strong connection, and I still do, to my brother. And I knew to honor him, I needed to just take that step forward. And I had absolutely no idea why it mattered or if it mattered, but I just said, Chris, I'm doing this because I know you would be mad at me if I gave up on life.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so it was a struggle every class to show up, honestly. Learning to set up the massage table was almost impossible for me, and it's a simple thing, but I was just struggling to survive. Um, but in the class, one of our first classes, the instructor asked us to think of a time when touch had made an impact on us.
Mm.
And my mind immediately went to the hospital when my brother had been taken into intensive care. I knew he was dying. And I was in the ICU waiting room crying, just totally unaware that anyone else was even in the room. And a stranger who worked at the hospital, he had on navy blue scrubs. I don't know anything else about him, but he came up to me and said, I'm just going to hug your neck. And he gave me a hug, and then he walked away. And I hadn't really thought about it until that moment in massage school. And I thought, wow, I actually really needed that hug. That physical touch just said something to me in that moment when there were no words. And in that same class, later that day, we got on the massage tables and did our first effleurage practice, which is very
Right.
basic. It was calves, and that was it. But the state I was in to get on that table and have someone practice effleurage on my calves, it was like the most amazing thing because I felt safe. I had that physical touch, and my nervous system settled for probably one of the first times since the accident had happened. It was by that point, March of 2006. So that began a journey for me through massage school of realizing, wow, touch and massage matter during grief. And that just kind of one little pebble at a time brought me to a place where I graduated, and that was in August 2007. And out the gate, I wanted to help grieving people through massage. and there really wasn't anything online. It's
Oh.
kind of discouraging when you Google something and it doesn't exist. So I just really did, I'm a researcher at heart, so I dug into some resources from other fields. I found an amazing book by Dr. Jeff Kane. He's an oncology doctor, but he wrote a book, and the title escapes me at this moment, but it's all about how when people are dying, it's important not to gloss over their feelings about it, and how our culture really doesn't handle death and loss and grief very well. He gave just simple suggestions about how to be present with someone who's suffering. And so that was my first resource. I studied that. I pulled on my own experiences, and I started working with people, offering free massage to people in my community 1 day a week if they were grieving. And it wasn't a massive response. I got a few people, but it was enough to really let me know that, okay, I'm not the anomaly here. This actually does help people. So I had really big plans. I was, renting an office that I couldn't afford to give grief massage away, but that's what we do when we're passionate. And then another blow came in Mother's Day of 2009. My mom died by suicide. And this was very much related to the loss of my brother. And unfortunately, this is another area I'm passionate about. Suicide does happen when people are grieving sometimes, and it's a very real thing. So that, I sometimes say I was just struggling to stand up, and kind of get my bearings after my brother's death. And that just cut me off at the knees. It was just devastating. There really aren't any words to describe what that was like.
I can't imagine.
Yeah, it was terrible. And I kind of said, forget grief massage. I couldn't help my own mom. What does it matter? It was very similar to that feeling I got when my brother died. What does it even matter? And there was a part of me that still knew it mattered, but I was so angry and so numb that I just closed my little office and I took time to heal. I took about 2 years, 2.5 years. I went back and got more massage every week, counseling. I also had Reiki treatments that were very helpful for me, trained in Reiki. It was all hands on deck, really, to survive that and to heal. But in 2012, I felt ready to get back into the work I felt called to do. And a new nonprofit had opened in Charlotte called The Respite, a center for grief and hope. And I partnered with them, and a series of events occurred that I cannot take credit for. They gave me the space to just create a grief massage program. I could do anything I wanted, and I didn't have to pay rent. So it was a little improvement from the first try. And they encouraged me to apply for grants. So on my brother's birthday, February 23rd, 2012, I sat with one of the co-founders and we applied for a grant from the Massage Therapy Foundation for grief massage. And I put it out there, and then I just didn't really think about it for a few months because I really didn't think necessarily anything would come of it. But then in July, I found out that they had granted us $5,000 to offer free grief massage to people in Charlotte. And my focus, based on my personal experience, was suicide, homicide, accidents, any kind of traumatic loss. And I wanted to really train other massage therapists too. So we worked that into the program. And, it was just life-changing. Most of what I teach is based on my experience with the influx of people that came in. There were so many. I learned really fast how to, they say wisdom comes from experience and experience comes from mistakes. So I learned a lot, and I kept records of my mistakes and what fixed them and, what the struggle points were. But we ended up getting another grant to do more of that work in 2013. And at that point, I realized I really want to teach this to other people, and I need more education to really make it what it deserves to be. So I went back to school and I got a bachelor's degree in psychology and public health. And then I decided, I also really want to take the mind-body connection further. So I've been training to become a grief counselor. And I'm going to graduate in May and open up a practice, a mind-body grief practice. And my goal is to hire massage therapists to provide grief massage within the counseling center. It won't happen right away, but that's my long-term goal.
That's amazing.
Thank you. And this training that I'm offering has been so well received, and it's so needed that I'm going to continue to expand that. So I know that's a really long story, but it's been a
very amazing story, and you're quite inspiring. I appreciate all of that, and having had losses myself, I certainly understand a good portion of what you reflected in your story. I don't know what it's like to lose somebody by suicide, but I certainly have had my share of losses, and it's the reason I've been called to this work as well. So I honor the fact that you kept going and kept plodding along, and also that you took some time to heal. I think that's very, very wise and a very good way to then be able to come back stronger and, really take hold of the industry that obviously needs to be taken hold of. So wonderful.
Thank you, Jean.
Thank you. Do you feel that grief is somewhat stigmatized in our culture? And if so, why do you think this mindset exists?
I'm so glad you asked that question, Jean. I really do believe that grief is stigmatized in our culture, and it makes grief harder than it has to be for people. Mm-hmm. The human part of us is going to suffer when we lose someone or we lose something, and that's just part of being human. And it's hard, but it's the price we pay for love. But there's this whole other part of grieving, the stress and the pain we get from the way our culture treats us when we're grieving. And that's not mandatory. That's suffering. That's not part of the humanness of grieving. And that is just additional struggle that I think that we have a responsibility to reduce that suffering in any way that we can. But yes, my understanding is that grief is stigmatized because death is hidden and kind of pushed into the corner, only acknowledged when it absolutely has to be. Our culture here in North America wasn't always like that. My understanding is after the Civil War, when embalming took hold as part of the way we cared for people, after they died, that changed. Death became less personal. People weren't holding viewings in the home anymore. Funeral homes kind of filled that need, and over time, death got farther and farther away from us. It's not really a natural part of life in our culture. It's almost like an aberration, something that is wrong, and I think that because of that, because we're human, we get really frightened of loss. And I think that affects how grieving people are treated. I think another thing too is our culture right now is very quick fix, very expecting instant results.
Right.
That works for a lot of things, but that doesn't work for grief.
No. And it's not a linear process, of course. It's not linear at all, which makes it difficult.
So it's so complicated, yes. And there have been a lot of misunderstandings that, 5 stages of grief, you check them off and then you're done. No. Not even Elizabeth Kubler-Ross intended her model to be used that way.
Correct. Yes.
But our culture is so saturated in the mindset, not out of badness or evil intent, it's just how our culture is right now. expect things to be neat and tidy and task oriented. So a lot of people feel powerless when they're with a grieving person. They don't know how to fix it,
Mm-hmm.
and that makes them uncomfortable. Our nervous system states are contagious, so the griever can feel that, and it just becomes this whole uncomfortable interaction where a grieving person often feels they have to hide their grief because they're making people uncomfortable. And I think the stigma really comes from kind of a combination of all of those factors.
Mm-hmm. Do you know of ancient cultures where grief was viewed differently?
You know, I think my understanding is that most cultures viewed grief differently, and many still do. I think that cultures who have a real sense of connection to their ancestors and a real sense of, the timeline that really embrace being human have a better understanding of grief maybe than ours does. There's a teacher I really admire named Stephen Jenkinson. He was featured in a film called Grief Walker, and he has a book that's really wonderful called Die Wise. And his background is that he has a degree in theology, but also in social work, and he ran one of the biggest palliative care organizations in Canada for a long time. And his observation was that, especially here in North America, where the dominant culture, of course, not everyone, but the dominant culture, was from immigration, people leaving their homeland, kind of disconnecting from their ancestral lands, that there's almost a sense of homelessness and lack of connection to the bigger timeline, and that's what's led, in his opinion, to death phobia and grief phobia, that there's just no sense of connection over time. So I think that's a really interesting way to look at it.
Absolutely.
Here in North America, we may be especially prone to this problem. But I think there's hope. There are people here in this modern landscape who are working really hard to create a lot of cultural change. I always recommend this book, It's Okay That You're Not Okay.
I've actually read that.
Yeah, she's a real advocate for cultural change, and I think she's making a real difference in talking about, like, the tagline is meeting grief and loss in a culture that doesn't understand. And then another book I'm working on right now that I haven't finished is by Malidoma Somé. He, I believe, offered grief rituals. I've heard that before. But my understanding is that in a lot of cultures that are more connected to their ancestors and have the kind of that bigger sense of timeline, that this isn't as much of an issue. This seems to be a Western, and a lot of the time North American problem.
So shifting a little away from culture and stigma, can you tell me a little bit more about how grief and loss really affects the body?
Yes. The effects are profound, and I think they often catch a grieving person off guard. We think of grief as mental and emotional often, sometimes spiritual. But if we think about the fact that a loss is a stressful experience, we can start to understand how it can affect the body. There's a scale called the Social Readjustment and Rating Scale that is by no means perfect. It was developed in the 60s by two white men. So clearly there are probably some important stressors that are missing here, but their top 5 stressful life events on this list included the death of loved one, death of a spouse, divorce, and marital separation, and serving a jail term, which are all losses. So if we think about how our body reacts to a stressor, if the stressor is easily resolved, you lose your keys and then you find them, or your car breaks down so you buy a new one. They get resolved, so you're not stuck in this ongoing stress response. But like we just said, a loss of a loved one or something that really mattered to you, that's not easily resolved. It's going to take time to process. It's going to take time to make meaning. It's going to take time to heal. And in a culture that kind of stigmatizes this grieving process, it can become especially stressful. So I often really view the effects of grief on the body in terms of a chronic stressor. And that helps with understanding. For a long time, I was collecting a list of all the symptoms I was seeing, and they were things like fatigue, sleeplessness, tense muscles, jaw clenching, jaw pain, upset stomach. And then when I started researching the physical effects of stress, like a chronic stress response, they almost exactly matched the list I had been collecting. And that was a real aha moment for me. I think there's some that may be real specific to grief, like pain in the heart, a hollowness feeling in the stomach. I've become aware that there's a lot of like deep sighing sometimes in grief. But many of the main physical effects I've seen, I believe, are linked to the stress response.
Would you liken it to basically the parasympathetic response just shutting itself right down, and the sympathetic flaring up in that fight or flight?
At times for sure. What's really interesting is also I've been researching and studying a newer theory of the nervous system. It's called the polyvagal theory. And so many books I recommend.
That's okay.
Stephen Porges. It's called The Science of Safety. But this way of understanding the nervous system is that, you know, we have that fight or flight response, but there's actually a deeper survival response, a much older one, the freeze response. And if we feel threatened, we're under stress, and we can't respond through fighting or fleeing, we can go into almost a shock state of numbness and shutdown. And that in that situation, when someone moves into the fight or flight, that's actually an improvement. And the goal is for someone to feel safe enough to then move into the parasympathetic. But the parasympathetic, without getting too technical, actually is responsible for both the shutdown and the safe feeling. This is an overreaction. So I'm really interested in that, especially in the context of grief massage. I think many clients are in that fight or flight, but I think there are definitely people who will be even in a shutdown state that's even a deeper survival response.
So how does massage then specifically, in your opinion, help those who are grieving? Why do you think that touch is so important for healing for those who have suffered a loss?
That's a great question. I think on the most basic level, touch is our first language. It's primal. It can communicate that you're not alone. It can communicate safety and support in a way where words would just fall flat. So I think on that most basic level, touch is going to send a message to the person, to their heart, their mind, their soul, and their body, that you're not alone. Grief can be so isolating, especially if your person is gone and now you feel isolated from others in your life as well. If they're not, you can sense, sometimes if people aren't comfortable with your grief. And especially in those cases, it's so isolating, it's so lonely. Touch can interrupt that and come in with the message, you're not alone. In this moment, you are here, you're supported. The other aspect of touch I think is important is just the impact on the nervous system. Like you mentioned, whether it's that fight or flight response or even a deeper shutdown, touch and massage specifically have the potential to create an opportunity for the nervous system to shift, to move into a healthier, more relaxed state. That doesn't always happen, but I think there's a really good potential. And I call what we do in grief massage assisted relaxation, because a grieving person who's stressed and suffering probably would like to relax, but to tell them to just go relax or go learn yoga or go for a walk or go do all these things, sometimes that's too much. They need assistance relaxing. And I don't know anyone who's better at that than massage therapists.
That is very true. On your website, you mentioned holding space for
Mhm.
people who are grieving. Can you kind of explain the significance of that phrase and why it's so important in this industry?
Yes, thank you for asking that. Um, the way that I understand holding space is basically a letting go of my expectations for a client and letting go of the need to fix them, letting go of the private agenda that as a human in this culture, I probably have. You
Mhm.
know, it's just a real self-honesty thing before every session to check in and be like, what am I expecting? Where am I going to impose an agenda on this client? What's really beautiful about space holding is it's not nothing. It's not just some ephemeral concept. It's
Mhm.
it's work. It's hard. It's a different kind of work. One way I've really learned a lot about it is from a book by Amanda Hope called Holding Space. Um, this is a pretty spiritual book, and I think there's value in that too. But really, what I've learned from her concepts of holding space is that it's embracing the feminine energy of being. She talks about when you bake bread or you're pregnant and you're literally creating a baby. You're not actively like forcing an outcome. You're creating the conditions for something to happen and holding the space for it, but you're not controlling what happened. You don't know a specific outcome.
I love that.
Isn't that beautiful?
It is.
And our culture is very skewed in a lot of ways toward the masculine energy of, I know just what to do and I'm going to fix it. And
Yes.
that's, I don't want to dishonor that because that's a beautiful and very important energy. But we have a lot of that, and it doesn't work so well in my experience with grief. We need more of that feminine space holding. So that's kind of why I feel it's so important.
Can you teach that skill, and how would you do that?
Yeah, I think that it can be taught, but I think that it requires a commitment on the part of the practitioner,
Mhm.
not just to learn it once or to learn a definition of it, but to practice it every time and really make it a lifestyle. And I think in my training, the way that I approach that is I cover the cultural aspects of grief and loss a lot to really normalize. It's normal if you want to take your client's grief away. It's normal that you feel uncomfortable. It's normal that you might want to try to fix
Right.
them.
Right.
We want to catch that and deal with it before you get in the room with them. You don't have to feel bad about it. You're not bad and wrong, but learning practices to identify it and release that so you're going clean and you're really able to hold the space. And I've had really good feedback from people in my classes that they take the practices I teach and use them not only in a grief massage setting, but in other settings too.
That's wonderful.
Yeah,
Wonderful for this society.
yeah,
Um,
really.
how difficult, because I can think it'd be extremely difficult, but how difficult is it for you to maintain scope of practice
Mhm.
in a in the kind of industry where people are really needing to talk and perhaps get more into the therapeutic end of things?
Yeah, that's been really important to me from the beginning because I've realized that grief massage isn't going to meet all of the needs of a grieving person. It's not designed to be any form of counseling or coaching, and that it's so important to be clear about that and communicate that expectation and the scope of practice for massage multiple times before the client even gets to the office. So something that I really emphasize in my training is when you are advertising, you know, you've trained in grief massage, you have a brochure or you have a website, you want to be very clear up front that this is not any form of counseling. We don't process the loss. This is about attention to the body. Um, and then during intake, it's really important to talk about it again so that it's truly informed consent. The client understands that if what they're seeking is a verbal processing or more of a counseling support, that this would not be the environment for them, and that we would want to make a referral. Jean, I think I lost you. All right, so we're back. We were talking a little bit about scope of practice and how it's really important to be clear with clients that grief massage is still part of the massage therapy scope of practice, which is limited to the physical intervention. I found that when the expectation is set appropriately, clients are very glad for the time to have a focus on the body. And often sessions are really done in silence. It's not a time to verbally process. But it's really important to be aware of the scope of practice. So that's something that we talk about a lot in my trainings, and how to communicate that to clients that isn't in a way that, you know, it only comes up in the moment when a client is needing you to counsel or coach. That's really awkward to introduce it then, because it can feel like you're rejecting, you know, or saying, no, I can't help you. That's not my scope of practice, which I'd rather you do that than nothing. But I would rather it become a part of the regular conversation where a client understands your scope of practice from the get-go. So if things start to feel like they're going in a direction that's not in the scope of practice, it's just a reminder. Hey, you know, we talked about my scope of practice. You know, I'm really focused on your body, and I have some wonderful counselors that I'm connected with that I can refer you to, because that sounds important. It sounds like you really would like to process this, and I want to help you get the right support.
What modifications from a normal massage client would you make by comparison to a client who is in the grieving process, specifically related to how you would touch them, or in what strokes you would use, that kind of thing?
Sure. I think honestly the biggest modification is the space holding that we talked about. A lot of the techniques that I've used are the basic Swedish strokes, effleurage, petrissage. I have used a lot of what I call resting hands. Now this can look a lot like Reiki or energy work, and I think it's important to let clients know that it's not. We're not doing energy work without their consent. But the warmth of soft hands just held in positions, I find really creates a nice flow between the active massage strokes and then a holding. And then active massage strokes and a holding. It's a real balanced energy to it. That's the massage technique I use that's not as typical for grief massage. I think some also practical modifications are allowing more time for intake, making sure that there's more flexibility in time. Clients can take longer to get off the table, especially if emotions have come up and they need some time. There are quite a few modifications, but very few of them are specific massage techniques, if that makes sense.
How has your work been received by your community?
I feel that it's been received really well, especially considering, you know, the way that our culture can get really uncomfortable when people start talking about loss. I think the reason it's been well received has been that I've been pretty selective in kind of my marketing, focusing more on educating, being an advocate, and connecting with professionals who I can kind of share what I'm doing as a resource for their clients. So my best relationships have been with counselors, healthcare providers. Educating them on what grief massage is and why and how it helps has really been helpful for me. I think that's made a big difference versus just kind of going out and trying to convince people to come and get grief massage. I don't think that's the right energy for this work.
Right. That kind of leads into my next question, is how do you sensitively market yourself for this work? Is it primarily through other health professionals?
That's what I found to be the most effective. One other way that I've connected with people has been health fairs, having a health fair booth. But I think in that setting is when I personally have come up against the cultural reaction to grief more. And this is something I talk about a lot in my trainings, is that you have to kind of be prepared for that when you just go out in the community. I've had people come up to my table very friendly and warm because they understand that it's massage. And in the moment when they realize, oh, it's grief, you know, there's a lot of different reactions. There can just be a real walking away or backing up physically, which I understand. I really do. But it can be hard for the practitioner to be on the receiving end of that. So I think if you're going to go out into the community and just kind of put yourself out there, it's important, A, to be sensitive and not be trying to sell people on the idea, but more, I'm here as an educator and an advocate. This is something that's available. I'm not trying to talk you into this. This is just so you know it's available. And I have had people at those same health fairs, usually at each one I go to, who are really interested, and they say, I wish I had known about this 5 years ago when I was grieving. And so for me, that's why I do it. I say, well, that's why I'm here, is I want people to know when they need it, that this is something that exists.
Great.
Yeah.
So for this business and for grief massage in general, what's your vision? What are you working towards?
Thank you for asking. My vision is, I'm 38 right now. By the end of my life, I hope that it's a standard of care, that it's not anything unusual, that just like prenatal massage, is adapted to that life change. Or even the way that hospice massage or oncology massage has really become a standard of care.
Right.
That grief massage is just as accepted and understood. I hope to train thousands of people. I hope to do research and to support other people in doing research. I'm building out a curriculum that's hopefully going to be 200 hours of training, and the goal is to have that in place by 2023. And I'm hoping that either the National Certification Board or another organization I'll be able to partner with to do a true certification.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of confusion in our field about certification.
Yes, yes, there is.
Certificate. So for me, I think we have to have the highest standards, absolute highest standards when we're working with vulnerable people, and grief makes us all vulnerable. So my hope is to have all of that accomplished in place, and just to create a kinder and gentler world for grieving people through massage, because I think we're really underutilized as massage therapists when we limit ourselves to just getting the knots out. Not to downplay that importance, but I think we can provide, I see grief massage as grief support through massage therapy, and there's a lot of potential here. So it's exciting to find other people who really care about it like you.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I certainly do. I spent a lot of time kind of perusing over your website, and I was very enchanted by your logo. And can you give me some background on it? There's got to be a story there.
Yes. The symbol of the snake is actually encircling the full moon.
Okay.
So I designed that logo a while ago. The full moon to me really symbolizes that feminine energy, the space holding, being with. So it was really important to me to incorporate that. But the snake is actually the Ouroboros symbol.
Okay.
And that is connected to many ancient cultures.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the oldest symbols, and it symbolizes wholeness. It symbolizes the idea that the end and the beginning are connected. It's a snake eating its tail. And that image really came to me a few years ago when I was going through a really painful life transition. It was not a death, although, as I've shared, I've experienced those, but this was another really painful time in my life. And that symbol just kind of came to me, and the idea came with it that what feels like poison can sometimes actually be medicine. not to downplay suffering at all and not
Yeah.
to minimize it. I think it's important not to jump to the silver lining or the lesson. That's especially in grief massage not appropriate, but for me, that just became a really powerful energy and a powerful symbol. You know, I wouldn't be doing this work if it wasn't for the losses I've had. And many of the therapists, massage therapists who train with me, not all, but many have had a similar path to this work. So it just kind of came together. I sketched it out, and then I went online to Fiverr. It's a website where designers, you know, can take your ideas and create logos. And the person I worked with just did a beautiful job, and I love it.
It's incredible. And now that I hear the story about it, it's even more beautiful to me. That's what a wonderful vision for yourself, and how appropriate that it came to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for asking about it.
You bet. It really intrigued me because I thought, a snake. Not sure I get that. So there's got to be a story here.
You don't ever see that with massage therapy, ever.
No, not really. Not usually. But so I knew there had to be a story behind it. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Of course.
I'm going to soon be purchasing the first of the 5 classes that you offer on your website. You entitled it "The Joy of Grief Massage," class 1 to 5, grief, the body, and the nervous system. And can I ask you then to share what it is that you find joyful about grief massage, in your opinion?
Sure. Thank you for asking that. The word joy to me is important for 2 reasons. One is more universal and one is more personal. One thing I've become aware of through doing this work and really learning from others in this field who teach about grief is this idea of a paradox, where 2 things that can seem opposed to each other, like opposites or even enemies, often they're not, and there's a joining that actually gives them strength. Almost like a bird having 2 wings enables it to fly. So this idea that love and joy are not opposed to grief and loss, and that we grieve because we've loved, and that the way we love, this came from Stephen Jenkinson, the teacher I mentioned earlier, the way we love the thing or the person who died is by grieving. So this whole idea that grief and love and joy are linked became really important to me when I was working at the nonprofit The Respite and doing the grief massage grant. That was one of their core concepts, was this idea that of paradox and embracing both the joy and the grief together. The personal aspect is that my mom very intentionally chose my name. My first name is Aimee, and she chose that in the spelling because it means loved, beloved. And my middle name is Joy. And she chose that at the time because she had a long labor through the night and I was born in the morning. And she was very connected to the Christian tradition. And there's a Bible verse that says that weeping endures for the night and joy comes in the morning. And so I grew up hearing this and knowing that my name had such a special meaning. When she died, I was so angry and hurt that I hated my name because it was a symbol of her. And I'm not joking, I actually thought about changing my name. That's how hurt and angry I was. And coming to that healing point where, you know, it was a lot of work, it wasn't a fast process, where I was actually able to embrace my name again. I actually started going by Aimee Joy intentionally as a symbol of my own healing. I wanted to kind of honor that too. So when I created the training, it was back in 2013 that I first created it. I just decided to go with the joy of grief massage. And I've only had one other person ever ask me about it. So I'm really glad that you did, because there is a significance there.
I think I kind of come at it with the thing of grief and gratitude are on the same flip of the same coin. And so yeah, in my own journey, that's certainly been important to me. And so I think I understand exactly at least the larger picture of why you chose those words, and they popped out at me. So I'm glad I asked too.
Yes.
The story about your name is beautiful.
Thank
It's
you.
absolutely beautiful. So I'm taking one of 5 classes, and you said something about 2023. Is that kind of the goal for launching the remaining 4?
Actually, the 5-class series will be fully launched this year. So
Oh, wow, okay.
that's a level 1 training. My goal is to have levels 1, 2, and 3.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah, I'm going to be releasing the recording of class 2 in about a month, and then my plan is every 6 weeks to do each until we have all 5 online. I've been teaching them live since 2014 as one full group, like a weekend class.
Right.
And then I've been teaching live on Zoom, doing a webinar format since 2016. And over time, just as I learn more about the people who want to do this work, and I keep learning, I'm a lifelong learner, the class just keeps growing in information and getting more packed with good stuff. So what was a 15-hour training is now, each of the 5 classes is 10 hours of content. So that'll be 50 hours of the 200 I hope to get that'll be out this year.
That's amazing.
Thank you.
That's incredible. So if you have one piece of advice for someone that really feels called to this kind of work, what do you think that would be?
I love this question. I would really have 3 pieces of advice. The first one would be to really find your why. Really get connected to why you want to do this. And that can be, what your calling is, or there's something here. I haven't yet met somebody who's like, oh, it's just another thing to add on my card.
Yes, I understand.
That person might be out there, and I don't want to dishonor that person, but I just haven't met anybody yet who, whether it's a personal loss or just a real sense of something speaking to them. And I've heard some amazing stories from people who've taken the class of just a series of events that lined up for them. So really get connected to that. I think that's really important. There's an awesome quote actually from Nietzsche, the German philosopher, and it says that the person who has the why to live can survive almost any how. That why is so important. And this work isn't easy. It's still very, very new. What we're doing is cultural change here. So it's not, I don't know that it's going to be a simple, easy process. So I think you need to be connected to why you want to do it. The second piece of advice would be that personal loss and personal experience is a start, but that it can also get in the way. It can really become a barrier. So that's why I think training and education is really important. What really sets a grief massage therapist apart is that they've undertaken the training to learn about grief and to really be prepared to offer grief support through massage. And the difference between a traditional massage client and a grief massage client is just that they are seeking grief support through massage. So their intention is different. So whether someone trains with me or, if they want to get education through, like, I think it's ADAC, the Association for Deaf Education, no matter how you go about that process, you really want to have some real education on grief and loss, so that you're prepared to honor that intention of the client. You're not unprepared for it. And the last one I wanted to share was a quote, and I wrote it down because I want to get it right. Margaret Mead said, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. So I think that's important to remember. We can make a difference, all of us.
Yes, and I certainly hope to be one of the people that is included in that with this field. This has been really enlightening. I'm so interested to take your courses and begin working in this field. I so appreciate you sharing your story, your teachings, your knowledge. You are truly an inspiration, and I cannot thank you enough for having the time and energy to do this interview with me. I'm completely stoked and excited now to move forward with this, and that is in large part to you. So thank you so much.
Oh, it's been absolutely an honor. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to meet you and connect with you. And this is my favorite thing to talk about. So I've had an absolute blast.
Well, you're wonderful at it, so I'm glad you're still talking.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aimee.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.